none of the Chinese billionaires wear suit and ties. Even just, it's athleisure is what they wear. And in the beginning, they were wearing Under Armour.
Oh.
That was like the earliest one, maybe like 7 years ago, 8 years ago. And then Lululemon entered China, I want to say 5 years ago was when they opened up their first stores. And then everybody switched over to Lululemon. Yeah. And now all the Chinese billionaires are wearing Arc'teryx. Because Arc'teryx was then bought by a big Chinese conglomerate. And then President Xi Jinping was photographed wearing Arc'teryx. And so then all the Chinese billionaires were like, oh, he's our influencer. All right, like we're all going to wear Arc'teryx. I'm Sarah Jane Ho, and this is Mind Your Manners, where no topic is off limits as we uncover the secrets to feeling at ease in every situation. The way you dress determines the way people treat you. We've all avoided or gravitated towards people because of how they presented themselves. And at the same time, we've all felt the confidence that looking good gives us, and the embarrassment of looking out of place. Yet, dressing, like etiquette, has been trivialized over the years. Both have had the habit of not being taken seriously. Today's guest, Richard Thompson Ford, is an expert on the topic. He is a professor at Stanford Law School, whose 2021 book titled Dress Codes: How the Laws of Fashion Made History explores the relationship between fashion and power. Richard not only talks the talk, he also walks the walk. In 2009, he was one of 25 semifinalists in Esquire magazine's Best Dressed Real Man contest. So this week, I sat down with him and my good friend Marcel Arsenault, who is a TV producer, to find out how we can use the laws of fashion and dress codes as a superpower. I've challenged Richard to come up with 7 rules to dress by, laws for how we should be thinking about fashion to present our best selves and get ahead in any situation. Richard, welcome to the pod.
Thanks so much for having me.
So tell us, why did you write this book? Why is this lens through history so important?
Well, I wrote the book for 2 reasons. One's personal and one is professional. The personal reason is that I've always been interested in fashion, and I learned by my father's example, who was a very fashionable man. He had great taste in clothing. He was a university administrator, but he trained as a tailor. And he went to a historically black college. And at that time, when he was growing up, one had to learn both a trade and a profession in case racial barriers prevented you from fulfilling your professional aspirations. So he chose tailoring. It stuck with him. So ever since, after that, he would examine clothing to make sure it was well constructed. When I got my first suit going off to college, he rejected the first 10. It's like, well, this is junk. This is glued together. This is, not high quality. We're not going to waste our money on that. So at any rate, he cared about the way he looked. And I began to realize that it was more than just vanity. It was important to his ability to navigate professional situations and social situations. And so I started to see that it was important. Whereas a lot of people would trivialize fashion, I could see how important it was for him. It's turned out to be important for me. And that was one of the reasons I thought it was important to write a book like this.
So it sounds like fashion for you started off as something personal that you grew up with, and then came the professional research?
Exactly. That's right. And the professional reason, I teach civil rights and anti-discrimination law and constitutional law. And in those 3 topics, it's surprising how many cases involve dress codes in one form or another. Litigation, legal disputes around dress codes, people suing their employer for a dress code that they feel is discriminatory. Perhaps it requires women to wear clothing that's more cumbersome or more sexualized than men, and women will sue for sex discrimination. Clothing or dress codes that forbid religious garb, dress or grooming codes that are not well suited to people with certain hair textures. So African American women as the most prominent example there, where all braided hairstyles were often prohibited by employers as unprofessional. This led to some litigation. So lots of litigation around dress codes, and yet the courts would almost always begin these cases by saying, well, of course, dress and fashion is trivial and typically wouldn't be worth the attention of the courts. However, in this case, there's an additional claim, discrimination or a First Amendment claim for freedom of expression that would lead the court to take up the case. So I thought there's something missing in these opinions, that the idea that people are willing to lose their job or lose a good employee or get kicked out of school over something that's trivial, that just didn't make sense to me. So I wanted to look into why people have cared about fashion throughout history to see if I could get some purchase on why we still care about it today.
Richard, I'm going to jump in and just say hi, Richard. It's
Hi.
great to meet you. I'm very excited that Sarah's including me in this conversation. This is something that for me, it's funny that you mentioned that your love of fashion comes from your father, and it comes from kind of how you grew up, what you were surrounded with, and I think that is why I am so bad with fashion, or at least I have been, because like I was literally having this conversation with my family. I was like, hey, I'm gonna do this podcast with Sara, and we're talking to this expert in fashion, and they kind of were like, oh, that's interesting, and they brought up this story from when I was 14. And they're like, remember that one birthday where all you wanted was name brand clothing? And this is because I'm the youngest of five kids, four boys. All of my clothes was hand-me-downs after and so, four rowdy boys, by the time you get the clothes, it doesn't fit the way it's supposed to. You're wearing like Jenko jeans that are like 3 sizes too big. It's not a good look. Because that fashion wasn't prioritized, I was the opposite. I kind of pushed it away. And so I think, because when you don't have the money to go out and buy the new stuff, you kind of say, oh, well, whatever, those people, that's not important. I'm focused on what's really important. I'm focused on like being a good person or whatever it is, or getting good grades, or being creative, going off and being in plays, doing music, that kind of stuff, creative stuff, not what I wear. That's so, oh my God, that's so vain. And so that was how it was for me, because I didn't have access to it when I was a kid. That kind of stuck with me. And when Sara and I met,
Yeah, we were freshman year at Georgetown. We were friends.
a kid without style and brand name clothing at Georgetown, that's tough.
I just remember, Marcel, you had your backpack hiked up really high up your back.
Yeah. Yes, I was a walking fashion don't. As I was kind of going through your book and hearing you speak on different podcasts, it started to kind of click for me in a way that it has been clicking over the years. And so that's why I'm excited about this. But I think that connection to, your journey started when you were a kid, and that kind of set you on this path, that there's something interesting there. And I think part of my goal in this podcast is, I think there are some other people like me out there who probably have that feeling as well, and kind of rejected something that wasn't natural to them. And so my hope is that we can kind of uncover for them some answers on how we can think about, all right, how do I start to change that? How do I start to think about fashion for myself, what my wardrobe, what my style, what my fashion language is?
Yeah, totally. Because I feel that, for Marcel, at least, back in the day, he was thinking, oh, it's too vain. It's not my thing. I'm focused on being a good person. You also have people who are like, I've gained a bunch of baby weight, or right after COVID, gain more weight. I don't feel I look good in these clothes. I'm a lost cause. And you have people who maybe don't even know their body shape, right, or how to dress for their body. So I think you have a lot of listeners today coming in from a plethora of reasons. But it's funny, Marcel, when you mentioned Jinko jeans, I grew up in Hong Kong, and what cool girls, 12-year-old, 13-year-old cool girls in Hong Kong back in the day were like actually super low waist, flared leg Jinko jeans that you could swim in, and then these tiny little like low cut Roxy crop tops. I mean, I'm shocked that my parents even let me dress this way. And then I had 4 piercings down one ear. I had a stripe of red hair, and I had a belly ring. And flip flops, of course, Quicksilver flip flops, and so it's funny to think that, Marcel, where did you grow up in Pennsylvania?
Rhode Island.
Rhode Island, right? And that so I guess Jinkos was like a global thing. When I was 14 years old, I left Hong Kong to go to Phillips Exeter Academy, this very preppy boarding school, and I felt so out of place. And literally, like with by the first weekend, I took the school shuttle bus to Portsmouth shopping mall and I changed out my whole wardrobe. I bought Abercrombie and Fitch, J. Crew, and changed my bags as well. And even I bought a little bit of Victoria's Secret. And actually, when I think about it, it's a much more appropriate way for me to dress. But the reason I really did that was because I wanted to feel like I belonged. And I just, in my Hong Kong cool girl garb, I stuck out like a sore thumb. So I think part of dressing is also that we want to belong. We want to have something to say about ourselves, but we also want to make other people feel like, okay, like she's part of us.
In the history of fashion, one of the tensions or one of the maybe dyads that I noticed was that on the one hand, fashion's all about individuality. It's about expressing yourself as a distinctive individual. And one thing that I noticed was that fashion, when it really emerged in the form that we recognize it now, was emerging at the same time that the idea of individuality was really taking hold, that the individual mattered more than the group or the royal subject or something along those lines. But at the same time, fashion's all about fitting into groups. It's all about signaling that I belong with this group and not that one, whether it's obviously gender, probably the most obvious one, but also religion, social class, region. All of these things are expressed.
Like New England preppy, right?
Yeah.
Versus like SoCal.
Exactly. And you see that on university campuses. You could see if the university is large and draws from, a lot of different regions, that the kids start to sort a little bit according to where they're from, and they may gravitate toward distinctive types of clothing.
The other kind of, dyad, I don't know if I'm using that word correctly. I've never used that word, but I'm going to start. So dress codes are also, it's about fitting in, but also controlling people, right? In your book, that's kind of how it begins.
Absolutely. It's all about control and ensuring that everyone is identifiable according to their clothing. So when fashion first gets going, one of the things that's happening, the elites are using it as a mode of statecraft. The way you dress is an important political tool. If you look at somebody like Queen Elizabeth I, she's a great example. Very elaborate clothing, really elaborately thought out, and people commented on how she appeared to be almost otherworldly in these magnificent gowns. And that's important because she was selling herself, yes, as someone who is above everyone else. Why should you listen to me? Why should you respect my authority? Well, the clothing sent this immediate visual signal, I'm not like you. But to get back to social control, then now what happens if the butcher's wife starts to wear the same clothing? Now the elite have a problem, and that's what was happening. When the economy shifted and skilled artisans and merchants and bankers started to make a lot of money, these are commoners, but they have enough money to afford these fabulous fashions as well, and so of course they want to try it out. And it's a problem for social order, because people may be mistaken for a member of the aristocracy, or worse yet, from the perspective of the aristocracy, they're sending the message that they deserve as much attention and respect and dignity as members of the aristocracy. That's really subversive. So we got these laws, dress codes, sumptuary laws that initially were designed to ensure that people's clothing matched their social status.
Wow, that is so fascinating. I think that serves as a great lens to start off these 7 laws. So the 7 rules to dress by today. What's number 1, Richard?
So number 1, fashion is a language. History is the dictionary. Fashion as a language is probably something everyone has heard before. We're expressing something with our clothing. And I think that's very true. Again, we're expressing affiliations with groups. We're expressing our own individuality. We're quoting from other people who have worn similar types of clothing. And in that sense, we're sending a message, I'm like, or I admire, this person. It may not be as direct as I'm going to dress exactly like James Dean because I admire James Dean. But if someone throws on that particular kind of jacket and a t-shirt, in one sense, they're quoting from something. What the reason that is attractive, the reason it resonates, is because we've seen it somewhere before. And that's how history is the dictionary. Because if we look historically at what types of clothing were worn in earlier eras, we can start to get a sense for why certain types of clothing resonate, why they're attractive to certain kinds of people.
That's really fascinating. And I think there's kind of two ways, actually, maybe even like three ways that that idea of fashion as a language is very interesting and history as the dictionary. One of kind of the historical context that I love that you've spoken about before is before people could read, fashion was a way of telling someone about you. And I'd love to hear that story. Um, but then thinking about how that relates to us walking around, meeting people on a daily basis, this other idea that, as much as 55% of communication is nonverbal, right? Only 7% of communication is the actual words. So is it true that what you wear says more about who you are and what you're about than the actual words that you're saying? I think there's something really interesting there.
Yeah, I think there is something to be said for the idea that what you wear may say more than what you say about yourself. And that's true for a couple of reasons. One is I think people are less self-aware for the most part about their clothing. They're not everybody, but a lot of people are. And so the message sent may be more honest, whereas we all know how to talk a good line when we're meeting a new person. So that may be one thing. When you're talking historically, yes, when people were illiterate, that example of Queen Elizabeth, but there are lots of others, that's how they communicated a particular kind of political manifesto. Whether it was the aristocracy, whether it was the elite clergy, whether it was members of particular social groups that wanted to advance an idea. And I think it's still true, although in a much more subtle way. Over time, we don't have we don't have sumptuary laws, for instance. So we don't have the idea that you'll be forbidden to wear a certain thing if you're not of the right social class. But we still have pretty elaborate codes about the way New England preppies dress, for instance. There's a lot built into that so that it's actually harder to copy than you would think.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like it's not like you just buy the whole set. Like there's some, they maybe have something that's old, right? There's something that's a little, that's like worn, like a plaid shirt that's kind of worn out a bit. I mean, it's not, a lot of them are not easy to copy.
Right. A lot of it's things that it's worn because you've had it for a long time. It's high quality, so it's not going to fall apart.
For your mother's.
Yep. Your mother's jewelry, your father's watch, that kind of thing. And then certain types of clothing that to someone who's not of that social set might look even a little ugly or weird. These bright Madras plaid things, or
pink trousers. I remember.
Right. Yeah, that Nantucket red.
Nantucket red. That's it.
I could never pull it off, but if you're of the right family in the Eastern elite, that's what they wear. Looks good on them.
When you were saying how so different back in the day, right? The aristos could wear one thing, and then maybe royalty could wear another. Because I teach etiquette, and it's the same thing with cutlery. Back in the day, royals could use gold. Only royals could use gold. So gold bowls, gold plates, gold cutlery. Aristocrats could use silver. The aristocrats could never use gold.
Interesting.
And then sort of the everyday man would use like copper or something.
Right. How interesting. Yeah, it's exactly the same idea. Everything's being signaled in a big social theater, in a sense, by what one's wearing, what kind of cutlery they're using.
How did they control that back in the day, right?
Yeah.
Were they arresting you?
Yeah, was there the fashion police?
There actually were.
The actual fashion police.
Yes, there were actually, no, maybe not designated fashion police, but there in Tudor era England, for instance, there were these laws called Acts of Apparel, and they would specify what you could wear. To say no one below the Knight of a Garter may wear crimson silk or something like this. And then, but they were really, really detailed. So there's lots and lots of rules all the way down to the poorest people whose clothing was regulated by how much fabric they could use. So people who used too much fabric, that was seen as an extravagance only for the elite. One person was arrested walking down the streets for wearing what were called trunk hose, which are these kind of puffy trousers that you might associate with, William Shakespeare. And his were too big. And so he was arrested for wearing outrageous, overstuffed trunk hose, contrary to good order. And the police seized him and took his trunk hose and exhibited them in a public place as an example for all to see. So this was taken seriously. Guards were posted at the gates of cities with a list of people according to their social rank so they could stop people, on entering the city who were wearing the wrong things. Lots and lots of these laws were passed too. So people cared about this, and they did try to enforce them.
Not as funny as the American fashion police.
No doubt, right?
Not nearly. But that's why, like you mentioned, so that guy was wearing hose.
Yes.
And that's another thing that I think is really fascinating. The cover of your book is
yeah.
that Louis the 14th?
Yes, it is. Good eye.
Again, fashion is language, history is the definition. Words change meaning.
Yeah.
Fashion, who wears what, changes over time as well. And I think the cover of your book, seeing the king in like bright red high heels, that's really interesting looking back.
Yeah.
What was going on?
It's stockings, yes. And that's exactly why I loved this image. It's a fragment of a much larger painting, but here I was hoping that initially people wouldn't be sure whether it was a man or a woman if they looked at first glance. Stockings, red high heels. They'd have to spend time looking, wait a minute, he has a sword. Here's a fleur-de-lis, this is royalty. But so there are all these symbols built into this image. And, fashions were different then. This was the height of masculine fashion. It was macho. Red high-heeled shoes started off as menswear. Red soles were a symbol of the elite. Louis XIV.
Well, so maybe that's why Christian Louboutin
Yes.
decided to go with red. Is that why?
I think so. I can't prove it, but
That would
really
explain
think so.
everything.
I would find it very hard to believe.
Yeah, royal shoes. Come on.
Absolutely. I'd find it so hard to believe that a French designer wasn't aware of this painting and aware of this history, and it's a great symbol. And in fact, red soles or red heels were restricted to members of Louis XIV's royal court. He got tired of other people copying him, and so he passed a law restricting them. And in a way, Christian Louboutin's doing the same thing, right? We have a trademark law where other people can't sell shoes with red soles.
Wow.
It's a status symbol.
Well, Christian Louboutin needs to make his shoes more comfortable.
Yeah, right. No,
that's what he should be worrying about. Because there's no way I can wear his shoes. They just stay in a corner of my cabinet unused.
No.
Okay, well, one
last thing, Sarah. So you're an equestrian.
Yes, I horse ride. Yes,
okay.
yes. I'm a show jumper.
And but there's a connection there, right? With high-heeled shoes.
Boots?
With high-heeled shoes, that's right. High-heeled shoes, the reason they started off as a masculine fashion is because they were initially worn by Persian equestrians, military men who used the high heel to stick in a stirrup, and it would stabilize them on the horse so that they could shoot a bow and arrow or something like that while they were fighting, hold them in the stirrup. And they were so sexy and so popular when they came to Europe that everyone wanted to emulate them. They're really macho. So the high-heeled shoe then becomes a masculine
and feminine?
Not first only masculine.
Okay, when did it become feminine?
Well, that's the part that's a little harder to parse, but here's what I could piece together. Fashion-forward women would often adopt elements of menswear.
Like Coco Chanel, right?
Yeah.
She was the first one to take the men's suit and put it on women.
Exactly. But there's a long history of this. So for hundreds of years, all of the most fashion-forward styles, the sexiest styles were men's styles, not women's styles. And women's clothing kind of trailed behind. And if you think about it, maybe it's not quite that surprising because this was a high status symbol And these were patriarchal societies in which
Right.
men were in power. So they got the most flamboyant, and and it was flashy. There was gold and brocade and jewels and all this stuff, all
Especially in
masculine.
Persia back in the day, right? I mean,
Right.
that was when they were at their height.
Right. And so these masculine fashions were adopted by fashion-forward women. So when a daring woman would adopt some little piece of masculine fashion, but certain things were totally off limits, like showing your legs, for instance. That would you'd be subject to arrest for really most of Western
So
history.
I would be
You'd-
I'd be subject to arrest right now.
Oh, yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah.
No,
For
no
several
question.
reasons, yeah.
They'd come for you. So, but women would try to adopt these little pieces of masculine fashion, and I'm guessing this is what happened with the high-heeled shoe, that women started to wear them, and then there was a big change that happened with masculine fashion, which explains why men don't typically wear high-heeled shoes anymore, and that's that in the late 1700s in various European countries, but I think it's fair to say it started in England. Men started to renounce flashy, fabulous clothing. One historian called it the Great Masculine Renunciation. And so men cast off the jewels and the brocade and the lace and all of this, powdered wigs, and started to dress very simply.
And was there a reason, like, was there some economic backdrop where maybe, they weren't doing so well?
No, it wasn't that. There was a political backdrop. That what had happened was the aristocracy had been discredited in England. Charles I was executed, and when Charles II eventually took over, when the monarchy was restored, he wisely thought he needed to tone things down a little bit. So a lot of men started dressing in more sober clothing. The life of court wasn't as important, so you didn't have to wear these flashy things. And that became a symbol of the Enlightenment, a symbol of political equality, or the beginnings of political equality. People even talked about it. One person who went from England across the channel to France, he's a gentleman, so he gets to France and he has to dress like a gentleman's expected to dress in France with all the elaborate clothing. And he writes back and says, "I felt so deprived of my liberty, having to wear this clothing, that I felt I had been thrown in the Bastille. And I longed for my loose little frock coat," which is like a light, which the English were wearing, because I longed for my frock coat because it places a man under no great restraint, but leaves him at liberty to do as he pleases, much as our glorious Constitution. So he right there in that sentence combines his political ideals. England has a constitution,
Yes.
human rights. France is an absolute monarchy. To clothing.
That just opened my mind in so many ways. And with that, I think we should delve into our second. What's the second law?
Clothing is armor. And what I mean by that is, that goes back to the story about my father. He dressed well. We lived in Fresno, California. If you know anything about Fresno, you know it's hot, especially in the summer. It's extremely hot. He would wear a jacket and a tie to the office, and no one else wore a jacket and a tie, especially in the summer. It was short sleeve shirts.
So it's just him.
It was just it. And we would all ask him, "Why are you putting on a jacket and tie? No one else wears a jacket and tie. You don't need to wear a jacket and tie. It's hot." But he said, "This is how a professional dresses. I don't care about what other people do." And I started to realize that the reason for that was that clothing imparted to him a sense of psychological well-being, but also a sense of dignity. And it's true that he did look more dignified than everyone else he worked with. And the clothing was part of it. Part of it was his own personality and the way he carried himself, but part of it was the clothing. So clothing is armor against social judgments, negative expectations. It can really work to protect you from bad things that might happen in the social milieu, and we're all familiar with those.
That actually reminds me of a friend of mine, and I don't know what the story says about her, so she will go unnamed. But she was married for about 7-8 years and got a divorce. And as she was going through the divorce, we were speaking a lot, and she said her husband used to have an extremely successful job. very, very well off. And he'd actually kind of gone into early retirement because he had liver issues from drinking too much because he had to do a lot of entertaining. And she, in a sort of a side comment when she was complaining about him, she said, yeah, and then he stopped working. And I used to like back in the day when we would get ready in the morning and I'd watch him put on his suit and he would go to work. Mm-hmm. And part of me thought, like, that sounds a little superficial. But at the same time, like, I guess, and she's a very traditional female partner. What she had liked about her husband was that he played a traditional male role, right, where he was breadwinner and he was on top of it and very well respected. And then for him to lose that identity, I think actually made her think less of him.
Oh, wow. Yeah. For a lot of people, I think that ritual of getting ready for work is more important psychologically than they recognize. And people who later join, let's say, private clubs where you have to have a dress code. Talking about this book, I visited a lot of these private clubs.
Oh, you should come to Hong Kong, check out all private clubs. Very stuffy dress codes.
Yes, they're the last bastion of you must wear a suit and tie or jacket and tie.
Former British colony. You know how it is.
Right, so it's got to be even
former
more
British
so.
colony. Yep.
Yeah, more so in Hong Kong than in the U.S. But here too, these clubs have these rules and they argue about them. But I think that a lot of the people really want an occasion to dress their best. And if, they're retired or the workplace has now become so casual
right? Especially after COVID, right?
Right.
It's the whole dressing down.
Mm-hmm. That people miss that. They miss the requirement. And so they say, okay, well, at least at night when I go to my club, I'm going to put on a jacket and tie.
Right. Like, this kind of makes me just think about, imposter syndrome is something that I think a lot of us feel. Even having success in a field after many, many years, you can still feel that way. And I remember the first industry conference that I went to, I didn't feel like I was wearing the right clothes and my confidence level was low. The next time I came back, having learned my lesson, and I felt really good.
Yeah. What were you wearing?
Whether I was kind of just walking through the conference or like at the bars afterwards, like that feels like it really does resonate, like clothing is armor in those moments. Right, where you feel like, oh, I'm on top of the world. I belong here, even if maybe you don't always feel that way.
Tell us about the conference and what were you wearing the first time and what were you wearing the second time?
So it was a television conference, and it was, I think the first time I was wearing I bought the suit. I bought the suit like the day before it wasn't a suit jacket, like the day before the conference, and it was like, there wasn't anything my size / also I wasn't very good at telling what was my size and what was not. So like my jacket was a little oversized. My shoes were not very comfortable or dressy. By the time my wife started dressing me, I started looking good. And that, that for me, that really was kind of the turning point. Once I met my now wife, like she started buying clothes for me that really like worked because she has that eye. She has that sense of okay, wear this, don't wear that. Even before this call, I was like, okay, is this a problem? Should I button this? Should I unbutton this? Like I don't have it, so I need to rely on someone. So that's another thing that I hope we get to, which is like resources for people like me who just don't innately get fashion, but we will get there.
Yeah, those people need to get a wife.
Yes, it's true.
Richard, how can people today dress in ways that boost their confidence?
I don't think people should dress in a way that feels costumey for them. So I wouldn't say everyone should go out and buy a three-piece suit or, everyone should buy a designer outfit. It's not right for everyone. But to find something that you put effort into because you've thought about it and you've been thoughtful, suits your personality and it suits the
context.
The context, exactly. It suits the context. And that's a big one, to know your context and know what you'll feel comfortable in. A lot of that will hinge on what other people are wearing, but not everything. Mm-hmm. But to have given that some thought, if I know everyone's wearing a suit and I decide not to wear a suit, it should be a conscious decision, not a mistake, where then I show up and feel uncomfortable. You've got to own it at that point.
Well, I remember when Gwyneth Paltrow was going through her ski fiasco, her courtroom style.
Oh, right.
Right? Like, and so are there particular colors that give off a certain vibe? I noticed she was wearing a lot of navy. She was wearing a lot of solid colors, white, gray. What was that saying?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think in court, usually people want to dress conservatively. And so, something that's low key, that's subdued, but also elegant and dressed up enough to show respect for the court and for the situation. And so those make sense. If you get too fashion forward in court, it seems like you're trying to draw attention to yourself and away from the proceedings. Um, you're vain, you're flashy. That's not the image you want to project. But of course, you can't look slouchy either. You need to look
Right,
like you
right.
care. You realize
You're
that the grab.
respectful, right? You need to project self-respect. And
Exactly.
I mean, I remember reading that Navy makes people instill trust in you.
hmm I could imagine that because navy is a color that we're used to associating with both the military and politicians, but the navy blazer, of course, comes from a military uniform, and so it's got a built-in sense of respect, of authority, of almost it has a heroic set of connotations.
Hmm.
I also think, like, I guess one thing that's kind of running through my head is, again, as not a fashion risk taker, not to make it all about me, but how do you kind of push yourself out of your comfort zone, right?
Yeah.
How do you, for instance, again, all my stories kind of go back to my wife bought me this, and I didn't know if it was me. If I don't know if I could pull it off. I think you mentioned that a little earlier, Richard. I don't know if I could pull it off. How do you know if you can pull something off, and how do you test the limits so that
Yeah.
you're pushing yourself, but not, dressing it like a costume or something.
One thing is don't try too many things at once. One mistake I see people make is that, hey, I'm going to bust out and be fashion forward, and then they have a bunch of new flamboyant things. They all wear them at the same time. Probably better to start with one statement piece. Otherwise, they're in argument with each other. You make one statement and it's clear. And then I would say look to people whose style you admire and see what you can borrow from them. Best if there's somebody who's sort of like you in some way. So, someone who you're like, this guy looks great every day. He's kind of doing a similar job to mine, or he's got a similar body type or a similar complexion or what have you. So I could borrow an element from that person pretty easily and have some idea it's probably going to work because stylish people know they know what's going to work on them. And that would be a way to start with something a little bit outside your comfort zone with some confidence that it's going to work out.
Okay, so Chris Evans, follow Chris Evans because I look just like him, and then just see what he. Okay, perfect.
That's it.
Yeah, because it's impossible to borrow from a supermodel straight away, right? Like
Right.
that's
No.
intimidating. But if it's, I like what you said, if it's somebody who kind of has a similar job as you or you can relate to, then
Yeah.
then following their style makes a lot of sense. All right, what about the third rule?
The third rule, attire equals respect. And that goes back to what we were talking about both with the jobs, the conference, and the courts. Dressing well, dressing with care, shows that you have respect for other people, respect for the occasion, respect for the job, respect for the situation. And I think thinking about it that way might help people who are likely to say fashion is trivial or likely to say, well, I'm not comfortable wearing, something that's dressy. To think about it in a different way, because you are doing it for yourself, but you're also doing it for other people, and you're sending a signal. If you show up to someone's wedding in flip flops and sweatpants, that's not just relaxed. That's kind of showing that you don't really care that much about their wedding, or at least that's the way it'll be read by a lot of people. So attire shows respect.
Actually, so I split my time between LA and Shanghai. And I've been living in China for the last 12 years now, since I graduated from Harvard Business School. And I remember going to formal events early in those days, or even going to weddings, you would see people who would show up in jeans and a t-shirt. But that's also because China was an emerging country. And now, just within like 10 years, the difference is very big. I mean, you back in the day in Beijing in a wedding, you'd see that, but today you wouldn't at all. And I think it's also, as a country kind of, China's becoming much more international, but also westernized. And a lot of it is, the Western is kind of the international standard.
Right.
And you see this change in how people show up for things. It's quite interesting.
Yeah, that's interesting. So people are adopting a norm of dress, and now everyone knows what's expected.
It feels like we've been kind of talking about like dress codes today as kind of being in this world, right? Showing respect for the environment that you're in, the restaurant, whatever it is, like no shirt, no service,
Right.
no hats in here, right? Like, are there today, like talking historically, dress codes are about control. Are there more nefarious dress codes that we should be talking about in the US today?
Yeah, I'm afraid there are. Because you're right that dress is about control, and sometimes that control can be reasonable, but sometimes it's a way of excluding people because of their social background, and or sometimes it's a way of stereotyping people, and those are bad. And there are plenty of examples of those. So, for instance, with respect to exclusion, a dress code that requires that excludes clothing likely to be worn by one group. Sometimes that's sending a negative message. We don't want people like you here. And I
Can
think
you give an example?
well, yeah, I could. So if you have a dress code that says, no trainers, no gold chains. Now maybe if that's part of a very formal dress code, that might be acceptable. But if it's a dress code that's like, hey, polo shirts are fine, khakis are fine, but sweats and trainers, gold chains.
No rappers.
Yeah.
No rappers allowed.
Exactly. No rappers, no mini athletes would be often wear these kind of things. It's associated with African American street culture. That's a kind of dress
Wow,
code that could be exclusionary.
I've actually. Where would that dress code be? Because I haven't observed that as a dress code.
I've seen this type of dress code.
What states have you seen this?
Washington, D.C. So often they're places with large African American communities, and particularly places with large African American communities that are fairly well off, and so they would be able to go to these places, but the venue says not, tries to exclude. At least they're trying to exclude a certain kind of African American, but it comes with some. Yeah, I mean, it leaves a bad taste.
Interesting.
For sure. Yeah. Wow.
So there are things like that. Then with stereotyping, most of these are gendered, but workplaces often have dress codes that require women to wear lots of stereotypically feminine things, even in a context where, it's one thing if it's, a fashion designer and we want everyone to dress fashionably. Of course, that's reasonable. But there are places that require women to wear full makeup, to tease their hair, to wear high heels, to wear nylons, all of these things for jobs like a waitressing job, let's say. Yeah. And then you have to kind of ask the question, well, why are we requiring these women
to look pretty
to
so the men
doll up?
spend?
Yeah, well, part of it's that. And some of the women say, I'm happy to do it because I get bigger tips. But others say, I don't want to do it because that's not me. I feel I'm being turned into a sex object. There have been legal cases about dress codes like this where one was a woman who was a bartender, and she said, if I look like a Barbie doll, I can't exert authority over those guys that drink too much. It's harder for me to cut them off at the bar, but now they're telling me I've got to wear all this makeup, and it's going to make it harder for me to do my job. So it puts women in a catch-22 when the professional demands of the job require women to be assertive, to be, command authority, but at the same time you have a dress code that's saying you need to look like a stereotypical Barbie doll,
Traditional submissive
woman, that sex object. So those are two examples of of problematic dress codes.
The thing with attire equals respect. I often say etiquette is contextual. And so often now, I think especially with the younger generation, people are so focused on being their authentic selves.
Yeah.
You shouldn't be your authentic self everywhere, right? Because it's not just about you. It's about like the people you're with, or the country you're in, or the job environment you're at. So attire equals respect is, I'm adding that to my little list. All right, what about rule number 4?
Oh, you are part of the design. Okay, so I got this one. It's perfect that we're in Los Angeles, from Hollywood director Paul Feig. I don't remember where I read this, but he was being interviewed, and he said, we go to a fabulous restaurant where they spent millions of dollars on the decor, furniture, everything is designed, down to the millimeter. And you're part of the design as soon as you walk into that restaurant. We know that everyone cares about how the place looks, so don't tell me that looks are superficial or unimportant. They didn't spend millions of dollars on this because no one cares, right? It may not affect the way the food tastes, but people care what the restaurant looks like. You're part of the design when you walk into one of those places. At the very least, try not to detract from it.
I completely agree. And I think that's why I often stress that it's so important to adhere to dress codes of a host, right? If somebody's throwing a party or a dinner, they have a dress code in that, well, it's because they're trying to design this moment, what the lighting, the ambiance, blah, 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 and the way people look. So I think it's extremely disrespectful to say, oh, well, it's just a dress code. I don't care, or I'm cooler than that, or I'm not going to be bothered with a dress code. Like, that's very rude to your host.
Yeah, I agree.
Well, what are the social implications of billionaires dressing down, right? Like Mark Zuckerberg or Steve Jobs. Is that great line from Crazy Stupid Love, that movie, where it goes like, are you Steve Jobs? Well, then why are you wearing tennis shoes at work?
That's great. Right. Well, I guess Steve Jobs kind of pioneered this uniform, this dressed down uniform with the black turtlenecks, which really worked for him. And
they look good.
They looked good, and it sent a message. But the message was really specific, I think. It was, I'm relaxed and casual and being yourself, being authentic. It was a big part of the culture in Silicon Valley. It's what distinguished Silicon Valley tech companies from the old IBM style tech companies where everyone had to wear a jacket and tie for a long time, or suit and tie. But, he's wearing a uniform, and it has, it's kind of high design, because I think the turtlenecks were like, they're Issey Miyake or something. They were not just any old turtleneck. So he thought a lot about this particular, dressed down look. But it did send an idea. I'm forward thinking, I'm practical, I'm down to earth, but also, I'm really put together, actually. I think when some of the other tech executives, like Mark Zuckerberg, for instance, where he used to always wear a gray t-shirt, I found a quote where he said, someone asked him, will you wear a gray t-shirt all the time? Why? And he said something like this. It's not an exact quote, but worrying about things like what you're going to eat for breakfast or what you wear or waste your time, and they dissipate your energy. And I wouldn't be doing my job as the CEO to make Facebook the best company it could be if I wasted my energy on stuff like that.
And these vanities.
Right. That's why I wear a gray t-shirt all the time. So I think they're sending this message. But here's the thing. Suddenly that gray t-shirt's not a matter of indifference anymore, right? He says I wouldn't be doing my job. Now it's a symbol of the work ethic. So now wearing a gray t-shirt shows, you're taking the job more seriously than anything else. You're serious about your work. Well, what does it say if you wear something fashionable?
Oh, like it's detracting from your work.
Yeah, you're not doing your job. You're wasting time. And actually, there was a CEO, Marissa Mayer, who was the CEO of Yahoo for a while, a fashionable young woman, and posed for a Vogue spread. And when it came out, rather than people saying, hey, you look fabulous, no, they said, she looks like she's going on vacation or out to a party while everyone else is working. So, they're sending a message, but maybe not the message we want.
Well, Mark Zuckerberg was a year ahead of me in high school.
Oh, is that right?
He went to Phillips Exeter.
Oh,
okay.
And
at Exeter, we had a gray hoodie that said Phillips Exeter on it. And a lot of people wore it.
Yeah, right.
Did you get in on that early investment round, Sara?
Unfortunately not. Yeah. And I heard he likes Asian girls. In China, there's this joke that all the Chinese billionaires and the men in the beginning, because none of the Chinese billionaires wear suit and ties. Even just, it's athleisure is what they wear. And in the beginning, they were wearing Under Armour.
Oh.
That was like the earliest one, maybe like 7 years ago, 8 years ago. And then Lululemon entered China, I want to say 5 years ago was when they opened up their first stores. And then everybody switched over to Lululemon. And now all the Chinese billionaires are wearing Arc'teryx. Because Arc'teryx was then bought by a big Chinese conglomerate. And then President Xi Jinping was photographed wearing Arc'teryx. And so then all the Chinese billionaires were like, oh, he's our influencer. All right. Like, we're all going to wear Arc'teryx.
Oh, that's
And so that is like, that's kind of them saying like, this is us.
huh.
Is there any element to that, like where it's kind of like in a time where people have to get dressed up to go to work, I'm so important that I don't have to? Is there like anything to that?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Reverse snobbery. Yeah, I think there's a real element of reverse snobbery in a lot of dressing down. Our joke in at universities is that if you go to an academic conference, you could spot the Ivy League professors right away because they're invariably the worst dressed people in the room. And I think there's some truth to it that there is, there's a little bit of a flex going on there. Like, I don't need to wear a suit and tie. Everyone knows who I am. I teach at Harvard. And I think that's also true for some of these tech CEOs. If banking is a great example. If you work in a bank behind a teller's window, you have to dress up. If you work in a bank manipulating stocks, you don't have to dress up.
Right, if you're a trader.
If you're a trader.
All the traders are a little sloppy.
Yeah, they've got a uniform. They've got the Patagonia fleece over a Oxford cloth shirt.
Yeah.
There's even an Instagram site called the Midtown Uniform.
Yeah, I've seen
And
it.
it shows, have
it.
you seen it? Yeah, they're all wearing exactly the same thing. But it's dressed down, and I do think that's a status symbol.
I knew it.
Yeah.
Reverse snobbery.
All right, what about law number 5?
Oh, paraphrase, don't quote. Okay, so that's often when people want, and it's really a natural thing to do. You want to try out a new style, and as we were talking about before, you're borrowing from history. I mean, that's how clothing sends a message. It sends a message because you've seen it somewhere before. Someone else has worn something similar, and so you're evoking something about that when you wear a particular garment. And someone might wear something with a little 1920s flapper look. And, somehow subliminally you get the idea that that's associated with the roaring 20s and, fun and a good time or what have you. So this is the way fashion works. But what gets costumey is when the entire outfit has to come from that historical period.
I hear you, but I'm going to push back a little bit. Okay. I think the reason a lot of people will maybe go to a store and like buy the whole head to toe set is because they actually don't have the confidence or the education of how to style something on their own. And so that's why they're like, okay, well, I'll just go with what's safe and just, I'll quote instead of paraphrasing.
Yeah, I think that's right.
About 5-6 years ago, I got a stylist in Beijing. Her name's Lucy. She's so great because before that I felt like I was like a decent dresser, but I didn't feel like I was like as chic or as stylish as I could be. And with Lucy, I think the best stylists are the ones. Well, it depends what you hire them for, right? Like if, but the best ones are the ones where you don't need them anymore, right? Because and she taught me so much, and after that I didn't need her anymore. And now I style myself, and I feel completely confident in trying something new or borrowing a piece, and then like jazzing it up. But she really taught me a lot.
Oh, that's great. Right. And then it starts to become like a reflex after a while.
Yes.
You know what's going to look good together. You know what's going to look good on you.
Right. So it's like, okay, I'm wearing like dark bottoms, and then I should contrast it with a light top. Just like things like that, because she would say these things. And I like to learn, right? So I was absorbing everything. All right. Rule number 6.
Speak easy. Don't whisper. Don't shout. Okay, I like speakeasy bars, so that phrase just came to mind. But what I mean by that is a lot of people are afraid to make a statement. And so they wear the most nondescript thing possible so that they'll just fade into the wall, fade into the background. You think that's safe.
That used to be Marcel.
I was wearing, bad matching combinations, so not quite. Didn't fade in the way I was hoping.
I think that's too bad. I guess normcore was one of the words that came up, for people who dressed this way. And then it became a fashion trend, right? Where the thing that people would wear to try to blend in, like a baggy pair of khakis and a baggy polo shirt and a pair of, like dad tennis shoes then became a style or a fashion trend. But generally speaking, that's one thing that won't help you develop personal style doing that. And it's kind of missing an opportunity for some fun. And also for the many advantages that we've been talking about that is personal style can bring you. But when I say don't shout, the other mistake people can make is to say, look at me, and have everything's got to be a statement. Not one statement piece, but 10 statement pieces that are all competing with each other for attention. The loudest, most flamboyant outfit in the room. And I don't remember who it was. I think it may have been Coco Chanel that said, when you put on jewelry, put on what you think is the right amount and then take something off.
Take one piece off. Yeah. Before you leave the house, look in the mirror and take off one item.
Yep. And I think that's great advice, because even if the things kind of go together and match, like too much distracts attention from everything that you're wearing. So, for guys, it'll be, well, I'll have a pocket square and a tie and a scarf.
And what would that be for women? What's too much for women that you often see?
I think often too much jewelry. That's a big one. Jewelry that's too big or flashy for the occasion. So, dangly earrings are great for the opera, gala night. But for most occasions, it's maybe too much. For business occasion, you don't want a big kind of chandelier style earrings.
Yeah, actually, the other night I went out for dinner with girlfriends and I had a big statement necklace on and no earrings. Because I was like, and it actually came with matching earrings. It's like, I'm not going to wear them. It feels too much.
Yeah, yep. And then everyone will notice the necklace.
Oh, yeah, I got a lot of compliments with the necklace.
I guess the other thing for women, it can be outfits that are too sexy for the occasion. And that's I'm very hesitant to say this because women face so much negative judgment about what they wear, and it's so unfair. A big theme in the book is just how much women are judged and controlled by expectations around how they appear. So I do want to say that that's really a problem in our society, and I don't want to contribute to it. But having said that, when I think about some of my students who are interviewing for their first jobs, the fact is there are more landmines for women, and I will see some of them make the mistake of wearing a really nice outfit, like they're wearing their best clothing. They follow the rule to say that attire is respect. They're going to dress up to show that they care, but the outfit is too much like what you'd wear to a nightclub.
Yeah.
Or a bridesmaid dress. It's not the right outfit for the office. It needs to be toned down, and that's a delicate balance.
This reminds me of as we were prepping for this episode, Marcel and I were talking about Sarah Palin and
right.
and her recent a few months ago, her appearance on Chris Cuomo's show. And she was wearing what was deemed too sexy. There was total outrage. She was promoting her new book, and she had this like low V-neck, it was like thigh-high dress, and then maybe like leather boots or something. And well, half the comments were saying this is so inappropriate for someone who ran for VP, and then the other half was saying she's 60 and fabulous. Don't be jealous.
Right. No, it's true, and I do think for the most part, I would say we should not criticize what other people wear, especially women, for either being too frumpy or too sexy.
But the sad thing is it can shoot you in the foot.
Yeah.
Right. You cannot get that job. You cannot be taken seriously. And I feel like that, when you say don't whisper, don't shout, I almost feel like now the fashion trends, it's either whispering or shouting, right? We had what is stealth wealth, and then we had like mob wife.
Right.
So what is it trending towards now? I can never keep track of things.
No, it's true. There is a sense in which it seems recently we've been kind of careening between extremes. Everyone got used to dressing down so much, and professional attire was, whatever you were going to wear sitting on Zoom. That's one extreme. The other extreme is people want to dress up. So when we get finished with COVID and we can go out again, people want to wear something fun, and maybe that's where you get the mob wife, because they take it perhaps to extremes.
Do you think about that in terms of like where we are in kind of history? Like if you're writing your book 100 years from now, like what do you say about the 2020s, right? Like how do you kind of think about where we are today in terms of yeah, our world?
Yeah, it's interesting. 'Cause it's so much easier to draw a bead on the past than it is on the present because you've got the benefit of hindsight and everything that came after it. But I would say, in one sense, we've got this real focus on being casual, everything's dressed down. Now, that's part of a long historical trend. You can see that, everything that we now consider to be dressed up was once sportswear. Like a jacket like this was sportswear at one time in history. It was either, there were hunting jackets, there were jackets worn for other types of sports, and now we call it a sports coat for that reason. But I do think that the trend toward dressing down has maybe gone about as far as it could go. And I
Not
could be
wearing actual
wrong.
pants on work calls. You think
Right.
that might be the bottom, right?
Yeah, right. I mean, maybe there is no rock bottom, but I think we might be close there. Part of it is that there's a real focus more I think today than ever before on authenticity. Like we were talking about that before. That everybody wants to be their authentic self. Everyone's expected to be their authentic self. Social media means people are looking for authenticity. We even heard about this in the last presidential election, that people are looking for a candidate who seems authentic and not scripted. And
That's definitely Trump.
yeah, I mean, if you spout off something that's inappropriate, that shows that you're not scripted. We know who you really are. And I think, but that's really valued. And so in clothing, people don't want to look contrived. It used to be okay to look contrived. Everybody, you wear a similar suit. They go to the office. That's what you're expected to wear. No one thinks that reflects your true self. No, it reflects what you wear to the office, and then you go home and take it off. The one other thing I'd say about this is that we're working longer hours as a society, probably than ever before. So that person in the 50s or 60s with their business suit on, they got to take it off at 5 or 6 o'clock.
Yeah.
Now we're working around the clock. So it's casual wear, but that's because you're going to get up, you're going to go to bed at midnight after having worked all for the last 12 hours.
Oh, yeah, totally. What about the lost rule, number 7?
Oh, dress for the life you want. I mean, the old phrase was dress for the job you want, but I think it's dress for the life you want. I'll hear people say that I always find sad is, well, I'm not the kind of person who could wear that. Like they like the outfit. They're kind of longing to try something new. But, I'm not the kind of person who wears, a nice tailored suit. Or I'm not the kind of person who would wear a dress like that. And I think, well, you won't be if if you let that hold you back from trying.
Yeah, you never will be.
You never will be. You never will be. But if you instead dress for the life you want, all right, maybe you don't have an occasion to wear that fabulous suit, but if you dress for such occasions, you might find that they come to you. You might find that you'll be invited.
Right?
Yeah, exactly. And because I do think that, just as we've been talking about all this time, you feel more confident in the right clothing. You'll feel more comfortable in situations where you may have once thought you'd never fit in.
And I feel like it's like you can change your normal. People think like, oh, my normal is like tracksuits and blah, blah, blah. But actually, you can have a new normal, right? It's just, it starts with the mind and then practice. I mean, I think there's something like it takes 30 days to form a new habit. And if you get into the practice of dressing nicely, right, dressing for the life you want, then it becomes your new normal. It kind of reminds me of, have you heard of this article that went viral about Neil Patel? He's this digital marketer. And the title of the article, he wrote it himself, was, I spent $162,000 on clothes and it brought me $692,000 of business.
Oh, that's
and
great.
he used to just wear like shorts, ragged t-shirts. He changed out his wardrobe. He bought like Tom Ford and Burberry and Gucci or something. And then he had a spreadsheet that tracked all his sales pitches and his closing ratios.
Wow.
He made it very data driven. And he said, this made me like, $692,000 in extra business. And I'm curious, like, how can we do that? How can our listeners do that, but like on a lower budget?
Right. I think that it is possible. You don't need to buy designer clothing or, Savile Row tailored suits. Those are great if you can afford it. But just elevating your wardrobe. Clothing is cheaper today than it's ever been in human history. And clothing that looks pretty good.
Oh, yeah. I love Zara.
Yeah. You can find nice, reasonably well-made, fashionable clothing at a lot of different price points. So it's not a matter of going to Rodeo Drive and mortgaging your house, but selecting a few classic pieces. Now, I would say spending more on something that's well made and classic is a good investment. That you'll have clothing that you wear for the next 10 or 20 years rather than something that falls apart after a couple washings. So that's worth doing. But it doesn't have to be Tom Ford. And a thoughtful investment in your wardrobe, I do think will pay off for most people in most jobs.
I think it's just wearing something as simple as like fitted clothing, right? As long as something fits you properly, you're already elevating your wardrobe.
Oh, yeah. I'm glad you said that. So that's a real plug for a good tailor, which is underestimated. People will buy something. Sometimes people will buy something that's very expensive off the rack and then not have it properly tailored. And it just doesn't, it'll never look its best. But investing another couple $100 to get it fitted right is a great investment.
Yeah, I'm inspired by this conversation. I think I'm thinking about all the friction in my, when I walk into the closet. Where are all those friction points? Yeah, I have all these jeans that are either slightly too big or slightly too small. I should probably go out and get some more that actually fit me, right? Dress shirts that are just hanging there, not ironed. I've got so many shirts, and well, that's friction. So I think that's another thing too. If you are not someone who, like my wife, loves clothes, loves shopping, loves kind of taking her stuff out before she goes out, she tries on 5 things. That's my nightmare. I'm I come in, I take a shirt, I put it on, and I leave. But finding, I think for me personally, what I'm taking away from this is finding places where there's friction in getting good looking, good fitting clothes on my body, and find ways of eliminating that so I can have more choices and make it easier.
I love your idea about friction and getting rid of friction. One way that people can do that is you buy clothing that will go well together. You get a few outfits that are go-tos, and then you don't have to think about it. You go, okay, I know this shirt works with this pair of pants and this jacket. So if I'm in a hurry, I don't want to think about it. I'm just going to put that on. I've already picked that out. I've done the work in advance. Another one is I find sending shirts out to be laundered is money well spent, so that you don't have wrinkled shirts in your closet where you have to iron them. That's a huge friction point.
I do not like ironing shirts or ironing, period.
Yeah, love all of that. That's really good stuff. That's really good.
I actually, I used to date this guy who told me that I should iron his shirts.
Oh.
And he said, because you're a woman.
Oh, wow. Okay. I guess that didn't last long.
Yeah, broke up with him.
Yeah, that's a red flag.
That's that was a very, very red flag. So from our conversation in these 7 laws today, it seems like clothing isn't just superficial, it is transformative. Absolutely. And that, dress is status, not only telling other people where you belong in the world, but also saying how you feel about yourself.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right.
But we learned so much from you today, Richard. Thank you for your time. Thank you for coming here and for being on the pod, and we hope to have you again.
Oh, thank you so much. This was a lot of fun. It was a great conversation.
This is Mind Your Manners, and I'm your host, Sara Jane Ho. No matter what life throws at you, with me in your ear, you got this. Don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and check us out on YouTube.